The morning of the Icarus Tower groundbreaking ceremony was cold and gray. I stood in the back of the VIP tent, clutching a clipboard and wearing a yellow, high-visibility vest that felt like a shroud. My mother, Madeline, was adjusting Julian's tie, her eyes shining with a pride she had never once directed toward me. "Look at you, Julian," she cooed, ignoring the mud splashing onto her designer heels. "The youngest architect to ever build a skyscraper in this city, you've finally restored the vain name to its rightful place, not like some people who spend their lives playing with pencils in the basement." She threw a pointed look over her shoulder at me. I didn't flinch. I just looked at the massive digital render of the tower behind them. It was beautiful. Sleek, glass-tapered, and aerodynamically perfect. It was my masterpiece. "Mom, let her be," Julian smirked, checking his reflection in his gold watch. "Someone has to count the bolts and sign the delivery slips. Adriana is perfect for the administrative tasks. She doesn't have the creative spark required for the big leagues. It takes more than a cheap degree to understand the soul of a building." Arthur, my father, clapped Julian on the back. "Exactly. That Harvard education was the best investment I ever made. The Icarus project is going to make us the wealthiest family in the tri-state area. Adriana, did you finish the audit on the foundation steel?" "Yes, Father," I said, my voice flat. "But I noticed an issue with the grade of the tension cables Julian ordered. They don't match the specifications in the original blueprints." Arthur's face darkened instantly. "Specifications? Julian is the lead architect. If he changed the cables, he had a reason. Don't try to find mistakes just because you're jealous of your brother's success. Your job is to process the paperwork, not to question a Harvard man." "But the wind load calculations for the upper 40 floors." "Enough," Julian interrupted, stepping into my personal space. "I've optimized the design, Adriana. I saved the company $6 million by sourcing those cables from a different supplier. It's called efficiency. Maybe if you'd gone to a real school, you'd understand the business side of architecture. Now go back to the office and make sure the press releases are ready." I watched them walk toward the stage, where a crowd of reporters and city officials waited. The cameras flashed, and Julian gripped a silver shovel, posing for the legacy shot. What they didn't know was that I hadn't just found an issue. I'd spent the last 3 nights running simulations on my old laptop in my cramped studio apartment. Julian had changed the alloy density of the tension cables to save money. He thought a cable was just a cable. He didn't understand that the Icarus Tower used a revolutionary torsion relief system, my system, that relied on a specific elasticity to counteract the oscillating winds at 3,000 feet. By changing those cables, he hadn't just saved money, he'd turned the building into a ticking bomb. I returned to the Vane Global headquarters, a building that felt more like a prison than a workplace. My office was a windowless room next to the janitor's closet. On my desk was the original file Julian had stolen. I'd kept the real calculations, the ones that proved why the cables had to be grade A titanium steel, hidden in an encrypted drive. I logged into the server using my junior clerk credentials. I could see the live build feed. The cranes were already moving, the foundation was being poured. 1 year, I whispered to myself. It will take 1 year to reach the critical height, and when it does, the golden boy is going to realize that gravity doesn't care about his diploma. Over the next 6 months, the tower grew like a glass needle. Julian was everywhere. Magazine covers, talk shows, charity galas. He was the sky architect, the man who conquered the wind. My parents moved into a penthouse apartment paid for by the initial investment dividends. They bought a yacht. They even talked about retiring and leaving the entire company to Julian. I was invited to the halfway gala, a celebration when the building reached the 50th floor. I tried to warn my father one last time. Dad, I've been looking at the stress sensor data from the core. I pulled him aside during the cocktail hour. The sway is already 2 millimeters outside the margin of error. We need to stop the climb and reinforce the secondary trusses. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. He was holding a glass of vintage scotch. Adriana, I'm going to be blunt. This obsession with Julian's project has to stop. It's embarrassing. You're trying to sabotage your own family's crowning achievement because you can't handle being the smart one anymore. I'm not trying to sabotage it. I'm trying to prevent a massacre, I hissed. Go home, Adriana, he said, turning his back on me. In fact, don't come into the office tomorrow. Take a week off, or a month. Just get out of our sight until this building is finished and you can see for yourself how wrong you were. I left the gala. I didn't go home. I went to the construction site. It was midnight, and the skeletal frame of the Icarus Tower loomed over me like a giant. I climbed the service elevator to the 50th floor, the wind whistling through the open steel beams. I knelt down and placed a high-precision laser level on the main support beam. The light flickered. It wasn't steady. The building was breathing, but it was a ragged, uneven breath. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the reading. Then I sent an anonymous email to the city's chief building inspector with a single attachment: the real torsion calculations. The next morning, the office was in an uproar. The building department had issued a stop work order pending an audit. Julian was livid. He stormed into the office, throwing his briefcase across the room. Who did this? Some anonymous whistleblower sent a report claiming the steel is substandard? It's going to cost us $50,000 a day in delays. My mother looked straight at me. Adriana, you were talking about trusses last night. Did you do this? I didn't send a report, which is technically true. I had sent a calculation, not a report. But if the inspector is here, maybe we should listen to what he finds. He won't find anything, Julian roared. I've already called the commissioner. We're donating to his re-election campaign. The audit will be cleared by Friday. And you? He pointed a shaking finger at me. You're fired. Get your pencils and your cheap degree and get out. You aren't a Vane anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I simply picked up my bag, took the original Ouroboros stamped folder from my desk, and walked out. As I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the half-finished Icarus Tower, I knew the commissioner would clear the audit. I knew the building would keep rising, and I knew in exactly 6 months, during the grand opening ceremony on the 100th floor observation deck, the wind would pick up. It would reach 45 miles per hour, a standard breeze for this time of year, and that's when the Golden Boy's sky would fall. I spent the next few months in a small office I rented in the industrial district. I didn't call myself Adriana Vane anymore. I used my middle name, A. Rose Architectonics. I started taking on small, difficult projects that Julian wouldn't touch, designing storm-proof shelters, reinforcing old bridges. My reputation grew in the underground circles of engineering. People started calling me the Fixer. Meanwhile, Icarus was finished. It was a marvel, a 1,300-foot spear of glass. My parents were at the height of their power. They had forgotten I existed. They didn't even send me an invite to the grand opening. But I didn't need an invite. I had something better. I had the building's own internal black box sensor data. I'd hacked into the Vane global server months earlier, and I was watching the stress levels in real time. It was the day of the opening. The weather report was exactly what I had predicted. High wind advisory, gusts up to 55 miles per hour. I put on my best suit, a charcoal gray power suit, and grabbed my tablet. I walked toward the Icarus Tower. Thousands of people were gathered at the base. The elite of the city were already in the high-speed elevators, heading to the 100th floor to ribbon cut. My phone buzzed. A red alert flashed on my screen. Critical failure imminent, secondary tension cables at 94% capacity, harmonic resonance detected. The building wasn't just swaying anymore, it was beginning to vibrate at a frequency that would snap the cables like piano strings. I approached the security gate. "I'm here to see Julian Vane," I said to the guard. "Do you have a pass, ma'am?" "I don't need a pass," I said, turning my tablet toward him. The screen showed a live thermal feed of the building's core. Large sections were glowing purple, the sign of structural fatigue. "Tell him the failure with the pencil is here to save his life, and he has exactly 10 minutes to evacuate the top 20 floors before this tower becomes the world's most expensive pile of glass." The guard's eyes widened. He grabbed his radio. I looked up at the 100th floor. The morning of the Icarus Tower groundbreaking ceremony was cold and gray. I stood in the back of the VIP tent, clutching a clipboard and wearing a yellow, high-visibility vest that felt like a shroud. My mother, Madeline, was adjusting Julian's tie, her eyes shining with a pride she had never once directed toward me. "Look at you, Julian," she cooed, ignoring the mud splashing onto her designer heels. "The youngest architect to ever build a skyscraper in this city, you've finally restored the Vane name to its rightful place, not like some people who spend their lives playing with pencils in the basement." She threw a pointed look over her shoulder at me. I didn't flinch. I just looked at the massive digital render of the tower behind them. It was beautiful. Sleek, glass-tapered, and aerodynamically perfect. It was my masterpiece. "Mom, let her be," Julian smirked, checking his reflection in his gold watch. "Someone has to count the bolts and sign the delivery slips. Adriana is perfect for the administrative tasks. She doesn't have the creative spark required for the big leagues. It takes more than a cheap degree to understand the soul of a building." Arthur, my father, clapped Julian on the back. "Exactly. That Harvard education was the best investment I ever made. The Icarus project is going to make us the wealthiest family in the tri-state area. Adriana, did you finish the audit on the foundation steel?" "Yes, Father," I said, my voice flat. "But I noticed an issue with the grade of the tension cables Julian ordered. They don't match the specifications in the original blueprints." Arthur's face darkened instantly. "Specifications? Julian is the lead architect. If he changed the cables, he had a reason. Don't try to find mistakes just because you're jealous of your brother's success. Your job is to process the paperwork, not to question a Harvard man." "But the wind load calculations for the upper 40 floors." "Enough," Julian interrupted, stepping into my personal space. "I've optimized the design, Adriana. I saved the company $6 million by sourcing those cables from a different supplier. It's called efficiency. Maybe if you'd gone to a real school, you'd understand the business side of architecture. Now go back to the office and make sure the press releases are ready." I watched them walk toward the stage, where a crowd of reporters and city officials waited. The cameras flashed, and Julian gripped a silver shovel, posing for the legacy shot. What they didn't know was that I hadn't just found an issue. I'd spent the last 3 nights running simulations on my old laptop in my cramped studio apartment. Julian had changed the alloy density of the tension cables to save money. He thought a cable was just a cable. He didn't understand that the Icarus Tower used a revolutionary torsion relief system, my system, that relied on a specific elasticity to counteract the oscillating winds at 3,000 feet. By changing those cables, he hadn't just saved money, he'd turned the building into a ticking bomb. I returned to the Vane Global headquarters, a building that felt more like a prison than a workplace. My office was a windowless room next to the janitor's closet. On my desk was the original file Julian had stolen. I'd kept the real calculations, the ones that proved why the cables had to be grade A titanium steel, hidden in an encrypted drive. I logged into the server using my junior clerk credentials. I could see the live build feed. The cranes were already moving, the foundation was being poured. 1 year, I whispered to myself. It will take 1 year to reach the critical height, and when it does, the golden boy is going to realize that gravity doesn't care about his diploma. Over the next 6 months, the tower grew like a glass needle. Julian was everywhere. Magazine covers, talk shows, charity galas. He was the sky architect, the man who conquered the wind. My parents moved into a penthouse apartment paid for by the initial investment dividends. They bought a yacht. They even talked about retiring and leaving the entire company to Julian. I was invited to the halfway gala, a celebration when the building reached the 50th floor. I tried to warn my father one last time. Dad, I've been looking at the stress sensor data from the core. I pulled him aside during the cocktail hour. The sway is already 2 millimeters outside the margin of error. We need to stop the climb and reinforce the secondary trusses. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. He was holding a glass of vintage scotch. Adriana, I'm going to be blunt. This obsession with Julian's project has to stop. It's embarrassing. You're trying to sabotage your own family's crowning achievement because you can't handle being the smart one anymore. I'm not trying to sabotage it. I'm trying to prevent a massacre, I hissed. Go home, Adriana, he said, turning his back on me. In fact, don't come into the office tomorrow. Take a week off, or a month. Just get out of our sight until this building is finished and you can see for yourself how wrong you were. I left the gala. I didn't go home. I went to the construction site. It was midnight, and the skeletal frame of the Icarus Tower loomed over me like a giant. I climbed the service elevator to the 50th floor, the wind whistling through the open steel beams. I knelt down and placed a high-precision laser level on the main support beam. The light flickered. It wasn't steady. The building was breathing, but it was a ragged, uneven breath. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the reading. Then I sent an anonymous email to the city's chief building inspector with a single attachment: the real torsion calculations. The next morning, the office was in an uproar. The building department had issued a stop work order pending an audit. Julian was livid. He stormed into the office, throwing his briefcase across the room. Who did this? Some anonymous whistleblower sent a report claiming the steel is substandard? It's going to cost us $50,000 a day in delays. My mother looked straight at me. Adriana, you were talking about trusses last night. Did you do this? I didn't send a report, which is technically true. I had sent a calculation, not a report. But if the inspector is here, maybe we should listen to what he finds. He won't find anything, Julian roared. I've already called the commissioner. We're donating to his re-election campaign. The audit will be cleared by Friday. And you? He pointed a shaking finger at me. You're fired. Get your pencils and your cheap degree and get out. You aren't a Vane anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I simply picked up my bag, took the original Ouroboros stamped folder from my desk, and walked out. As I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the half-finished Icarus Tower, I knew the commissioner would clear the audit. I knew the building would keep rising, and I knew in exactly 6 months, during the grand opening ceremony on the 100th floor observation deck, the wind would pick up. It would reach 45 miles per hour, a standard breeze for this time of year, and that's when the golden boy's sky would fall. I spent the next few months in a small office I rented in the industrial district. I didn't call myself Adriana Vane anymore. I used my middle name, A. Rose Architectonics. I started taking on small, difficult projects that Julian wouldn't touch, designing storm-proof shelters, reinforcing old bridges. My reputation grew in the underground circles of engineering. People started calling me the fixer. Meanwhile, Icarus was finished. It was a marvel, a 1,300-foot spear of glass. My parents were at the height of their power. They had forgotten I existed. They didn't even send me an invite to the grand opening. But I didn't need an invite. I had something better. I had the building's own internal black box sensor data. I'd hacked into the Vane global server months earlier, and I was watching the stress levels in real time. It was the day of the opening. The weather report was exactly what I had predicted. High wind advisory, gusts up to 55 miles per hour. I put on my best suit, a charcoal gray power suit, and grabbed my tablet. I walked toward the Icarus Tower. Thousands of people were gathered at the base. The elite of the city were already in the high-speed elevators, heading to the 100th floor to ribbon cut. My phone buzzed. A red alert flashed on my screen. Critical failure imminent. Secondary tension cables at 94% capacity. Harmonic resonance detected. The building wasn't just swaying anymore. It was beginning to vibrate at a frequency that would snap the cables like piano strings. I approached the security gate. "I'm here to see Julian Vane," I said to the guard. "Do you have a pass, ma'am?" "I don't need a pass," I said, turning my tablet toward him. The screen showed a live thermal feed of the building's core. Large sections were glowing purple, the sign of structural fatigue. "Tell him the failure with the pencil is here to save his life, and he has exactly 10 minutes to evacuate the top 20 floors before this tower becomes the world's most expensive pile of glass." The guard's eyes widened. He grabbed his radio. I looked up at the 100th floor. There is a specific sound a building makes when it's about to give up. It's not a crash, not at first. It's a low-frequency groan, a sub-bass vibration that you feel in your marrow before you hear it with your ears. It's the sound of thousands of tons of steel screaming under the weight of a lie. As I stood in the lobby of the Icarus Tower, the marble floors beneath my feet began to thrum. To the socialites and politicians laughing in the elevators, it was probably just the power of the wind. To me, it was the sound of Julian's efficiency snapping in real time. My brother thought he had built a monument to his ego. He had actually built a 1,300-foot guillotine. I didn't wait for the guard to finish his radio call. I knew the security codes for the service elevators. I had programmed them into the original spec docs 3 years ago. I swiped my tablet against the reader, and the doors hissed open. I bypassed the floors where the common guests were celebrating and headed straight for the 100th floor observation deck. The ascent was nauseating. In a properly designed skyscraper, the dampening systems make the movement invisible. But here, as the car shot past the 80th floor, the car began to sway, scraping against the guide rails with a shower of sparks I could see through the glass. The building was leaning. The doors opened to an absolute opulence. Crystal chandeliers, a jazz quartet, and the scent of expensive perfume and Wagyu beef. At the far end of the deck, Julian stood at a podium made of solid glass, a pair of oversized golden scissors in his hand. My parents stood behind him, beaming like they had personally carried every brick. "And so," Julian's voice boomed through the speakers, "Icarus stands not just as a building, but as a testament to what can be achieved when you combine a world-class education with the courage to innovate. We didn't just follow the rules, we rewrote them." "You didn't rewrite the rules, Julian." My voice cut through the applause as I stepped out of the elevator. "You just ignored the laws of physics. And unfortunately for everyone in this room, physics doesn't take bribes." The room went silent. The jazz quartet stopped mid-note. 300 pairs of eyes, the most powerful people in the city, turned toward me. I was still wearing my charcoal suit, my tablet clutched in my hand like a weapon. Madeline, my mother, stepped forward, her face turning a deep shade of scarlet. Adriana, how did you get in here? Security, I told you this girl was unstable. She's trying to ruin her brother's moment. Mom, stay back, I said, my eyes locked on Julian. He looked like he wanted to vanish. Julian, check your internal pressure sensors. Floor 92, Sector B. Now. Julian tried to maintain his smug facade. Adriana, please, we all know you're bitter about your cheek career, but making a scene at a ribbon cutting is a new low even for you. This building is the safest structure in the world. I personally oversaw every crack. A sound like a lightning strike echoed through the ballroom. The massive crystal chandelier in the center of the room swung violently to the left. A woman screamed. Glasses of champagne slid off tables and shattered on the floor. That was the first tension cable, Julian, I said, my voice deadly calm while the room began to panic. Grade B alloy. It just snapped under the harmonic resonance of the 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts outside. You have exactly 400 Grade B cables left. At the current oscillation rate, they'll start popping like stitches on a cheap suit. My father grabbed Julian by the shoulder. Julian, what is she talking about? What was that noise? It's just the building settling, Dad, Julian stammered, his hands shaking so much the golden scissors fell to the floor with a metallic clang. I walked to the podium and tapped my tablet into the main display system. The giant render of the sky architect, Julian Vane, was replaced by a structural heat map. It was bleeding red. This isn't settling, Father, I said, looking at him. This is a structural collapse in progress. The torsion relief system I designed was calibrated for Grade A titanium steel. Julian swapped them for Grade B to save $6 million. But Grade B doesn't have the elasticity to handle the sway at this height. Look at the screen. The heat map showed a pulsing red ring around the 92nd floor. Another crack shook the building. This time, a floor-to-ceiling window in the corner spiderwebbed, the tempered glass screaming under the pressure. The crowd erupted into a stampede. People lunged for the elevators, but I grabbed the microphone. "Stay away from the elevators," I yelled. "The shafts are already warping. If you get in, you'll be trapped in a steel coffin when the power cuts out. Use the emergency stairwell, floors 1 through 80. Above 80, the stairs are already under too much shear. Stay in the core. It's the only place reinforced with the original Grade A steel I managed to sneak into the foundation." Julian lunged at me, trying to grab the tablet. "You're lying! You're trying to steal my glory! I'm the Harvard man! I'm the architect!" I shoved him back with a strength born of 3 years of repressed fury. "You're a thief, Julian. You stole my blueprints from my desk in 2023. You thought a building was just a pretty picture. You didn't realize that every line I drew was a mathematical necessity. You didn't build this. I did. And right now, I'm the only thing standing between you and 100 counts of manslaughter." Arthur looked at the screen, then at the shattered window, and finally at me. For the first time in my life, he didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with terror and a dawning, horrific realization. "Adriana, can you fix it?" "I can stabilize it long enough to evacuate, but I need access to the central ballast tanks. Julian, you changed the software password, didn't you? What is it?" Julian stared at me, his mouth hanging open. I don't remember. The consultants set it up. I never actually... I didn't think I'd need it." I looked at my brother, the man my parents had bankrolled, the man they had praised while they called me a clerk. He didn't even know the password to his own building's safety system. "Move," I growled. I plugged my tablet directly into the podium's data port. "I'm initiating a ghost architect override. I left a back door in the code before you fired me, Julian. I knew you'd be too lazy to change the kernel." On the screen, the system began to pulse. Override granted. Architect, Vane A. I began shifting the liquid ballast in the upper tanks, moving hundreds of tons of water to the windward side of the building to act as a counterweight. The building groaned, a deep metallic sound that felt like the tower was sighing in relief. The sway slowed, the vibrating stopped. "The building is stable for now," I said to the room, which was now half empty as guests fled down the stairs. "But the wind is picking up. We have 30 minutes before the resonance hits the point of no return. Father, Madeline, get out, now!" "We're not leaving without you," Madeline cried, her voice trembling. "You left me a long time ago, Mom," I said, not looking up from the screen. "Go, take your golden boy with you. I have to stay here to manually balance the tanks while the evacuation continues. If I stop, the building starts swinging again." Julian didn't wait for a second invitation. He turned and ran for the stairs, leaving our parents standing there. Arthur looked at his son's retreating back, then at me, the daughter he had called a failure with a pencil. "Adriana, Go, Dad," I said, my voice softening just an inch. "If you want to do one thing right today, make sure the people on the lower floors don't panic. Direct the flow. Use that vain global authority for something other than a bank loan." They left. I was alone on the 100th floor of the tallest building in the city, surrounded by shattered crystal and the smell of ozone. The wind roared outside, clawing at the glass. My tablet showed the evacuation progress, 60%, 70%. The tablet beeped. "Warning, cable 382 failure, cable 383 failure." The B-grade cables were snapping in a chain reaction. The ballast tanks were at 100% capacity. I couldn't move any more water. I looked at the original blueprints on my screen. There was one last option. The Icarus had a crown, a 50-ton decorative spire that Julian had added to make the building the tallest. It wasn't in my original design. It was a giant sail, catching the wind and putting a lethal amount of torque on the frame. If I could jettison the spire, the wind load would drop by 30%. But the release bolts were manual, and they were located on the exterior maintenance catwalk at 1,300 feet in a gale. I grabbed a safety harness from the emergency locker behind the bar. I looked at my cheap state college degree, the digital copy I kept on my phone. Then I looked at the golden scissors.
They say the higher you climb, the harder it is to breathe. At 1,300 feet, the air isn't just thin, it's a living, screaming wall of pressure. As I stepped onto the maintenance catwalk, the world turned into a blur of gray clouds and the terrifyingly distant lights of the city below. My brother, Julian, always loved the view from the top, but he never understood the cost of standing here. He loved the glory. I understood the load. He loved the height. I respected the gravity. Now, as the Icarus Tower shivered beneath my boots, I realized I was the only person on Earth who could stop this needle from snapping. The wind hit me like a physical blow, a 60-mile-per-hour gust that threatened to rip my charcoal blazer right off my shoulders. I hooked my secondary safety carabiner to the cold steel rail, my knuckles white and trembling. Above me, the decorative spire, Julian's crowning achievement, loomed like a giant silver spear. It was a 50-ton aesthetic vanity project, and right now it was acting as a massive lever, prying the building apart at its seams. I crawled along the narrow metal grating, the spray of rain stinging my eyes. The sound was deafening, a constant rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the building's harmonic resonance. Every time the wind gusted, the spire caught the air, and I could feel the catwalk groan as the steel bolts twisted. If I didn't release the hydraulic locking pins in the next 5 minutes, the torsion would exceed the breaking point of the main support pillars. I reached the control box at the base of the spire. It was encased in ice and grit. I pulled a heavy-duty wrench from my harness, the kind of tool Julian wouldn't even know how to hold, and smashed the glass cover. Inside were 3 manual release levers. "Come on, Adriana," I whispered to myself, my breath hitching in the cold. "You designed the failsafe. Now make it work." Back on the ground, the scene was chaos. News helicopters were circling the tower like vultures, their searchlights cutting through the mist. Millions were watching the live feed. They saw a lone figure in a suit, a tiny speck of defiance against the storm, clinging to the top of the world. In the back of a black SUV speeding away from the site, Julian Vane was staring at his phone, his face pale and covered in sweat. "She's going to kill us all," he hissed to our parents. "If that spire falls, it'll crush 3 blocks. I'll be ruined. She's doing this to destroy my reputation." Arthur, my father, looked at his son, really looked at him for the first time in years. He saw the cowardice, the vanity, and the hollow shell of the Harvard genius he had spent millions to create. Then he looked at the screen, at the daughter he had dismissed as a clerk, who was currently risking her life to fix Julian's arrogance. "Shut up, Julian," Arthur said, his voice cold and heavy with shame. "The reputation is already gone. Right now, your sister is the only reason we aren't all in handcuffs for murder." High above, I gripped the first lever. It was frozen shut. I threw my entire body weight against it, my knuckles white and trembling. "Move!" I screamed into the wind. Clang. The first hydraulic pin retracted. The spire shifted an inch, the metal screeching in protest. The building shuddered so violently I was nearly thrown over the rail, my safety harness snapping taut and knocking the wind out of me. I hung there for a second, suspended over the abyss, looking down at the tiny ant-like lights of the city. I hauled myself back up, my muscles screaming. 2 more. I reached for the second lever, but I stopped. I looked at my tablet, which was magnetically mounted to the railing. I had a live feed of the plaza below. The evacuation wasn't complete. Because of the grand opening festivities, the police hadn't been able to clear the North Plaza yet. If I dropped the spire now, it would fall straight onto the emergency medical tents and the thousands still bottlenecked at the exits. "I can't drop it," I gasped, the realization hitting me harder than the cold. "I have to wait." I tapped into the tower's PA system via my tablet. My voice, distorted by the wind and the high-gain microphone, boomed over the plaza 1,300 feet below. "North Plaza! Clear the North Plaza immediately! Do not stop for your cars! Move west!" People looked up, hearing the voice of a ghost coming from the clouds. The panic intensified, but the direction helped. The sea of people began to shift. I watched the thermal map on my tablet. The blue safe zone was growing, but the red danger zone, the spire's calculated impact path, was still occupied by a dozen slow-moving people. Warning, main core shear at 98%. The building was about to snap. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to choose, the building and everyone still inside, or the few still in the plaza. Then I saw a flicker on the 99th floor, a movement. Someone hadn't evacuated. I scrambled back into the observation deck through the service hatch, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ran down the stairs to the 99th floor, the VIP lounge. There, huddled under a heavy oak table, was a young girl, no older than 7. She was clutching a stuffed bear, her eyes wide with terror. She must have been separated from her parents during the stampede. "Hey," I said, dropping to my knees and sliding across the floor as the building tilted another 3 degrees. "Hey, it's okay. I'm Adriana. I'm the one who built this place. Well, the good parts of it, anyway." The girl looked at me, her lip trembling. "Is it going to fall?" "Not today," I said, reaching out my hand. "But we have to be very fast. I'm going to take you to the service elevator. It's the only one still working. Can you be brave for me?" I grabbed the girl and ran. I didn't head for the stairs. I headed for the heavy-duty freight elevator I had gotten up here from.
I put her inside and punched the code for the 40th floor, where the structural damping was strongest and the fire crews were still stationed. "Stay in the back, keep your head down," I told her as the doors closed. I turned back to the balcony. No more distractions. I checked the plaza feed. Clear. The last of the crowds had surged into the subway tunnels and surrounding buildings. I stepped back out into the hurricane. I grabbed the second lever. Clang! It released. I reached for the third and final lever, the one that held the 50-ton spear to the skeleton of the tower. "This is for the cheap degree," I grunted, pulling the lever with every ounce of strength I had left. The sound was like a bomb going off. The final titanium bolt sheared in half. For a heartbeat, the spire stood perfectly still, balanced precariously on the edge of physics. Then a massive gust of wind caught it. I watched in slow motion as Julian's crown slid off the building. It didn't just fall, it sailed, the wind carrying it away from the base of the tower. It plummeted through the mist, a silver streak of arrogance returning to the earth. A second later, a dull thud vibrated through the structure as it hit the empty North Plaza, burying itself 10 feet into the concrete. Instantly, the Icarus Tower stopped screaming. The violent oscillation died down to a manageable sway. The red alerts on my tablet turned to yellow, then green. The torque was gone. The building was stable. I slumped against the railing, my lungs burning, my suit ruined, and my hands bleeding. I looked down at the city. The helicopters were still there, their cameras trained on me. "I'm Adriana Vane," I whispered, though no one could hear me, "and I just took my building back."
The descent was different. The elevator didn't scrape against the rails this time. It glided through a building that finally felt at peace with gravity. As I stood in the mirrored car, looking at the bruised, soot-stained woman reflecting back at me, I realized that the Adriana who went up there, the administrative failure, was dead. The woman coming down was the architect. But I knew Julian. I knew how the Vane family machine worked. They didn't survive on truth, they survived on optics. And as the doors opened to the ground floor lobby, I could already hear the spin doctors at work. The lobby was a war zone of emergency responders, crying socialites, and blinding camera flashes. As I stepped out of the elevator, a silence rippled through the crowd. I was a mess. My hair was matted with rain, my charcoal blazer was torn at the shoulder, and my hands were crudely bandaged with silk napkins I'd found in the VIP lounge. "There she is!" a reporter screamed, and suddenly I was engulfed by a sea of microphones. But before I could speak, a familiar figure pushed through the crowd. Julian. He had changed his shirt. He looked polished, his hair perfectly coiffed, and he was holding a bottle of water like he'd just finished a light workout instead of a cowardly flight down 100 flights of stairs. Behind him, our parents followed, looking dazed but regained. "Adriana!" Julian cried out, his voice filled with a fake theatrical relief. He tried to wrap his arm around my shoulder for the cameras. "Thank God you're safe! I was so worried when I gave you the order to trigger the emergency spire release. It was a risky move, but my design allowed for exactly that kind of failsafe." I stopped dead in my tracks. I stepped out of his reach, looking at him with a coldness that made the surrounding reporters gasp. "Your order, Julian? Your design?" Julian didn't blink. He turned to the cameras, flashing that Harvard-molded smile. It was a difficult decision to make from the command center downstairs, but as the lead architect, I had to prioritize the city's safety over the aesthetics of my building. I told Adriana exactly which levers to pull. She did a brave job executing my instructions. I looked at my father, Arthur. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the ground, his jaw tight. My mother, Madeline, was already nodding along to Julian's lie, her hand on his arm as if to anchor the family's wealth to his fabricated heroism.
They weren't just letting him lie, they were banking on it. If Julian was the hero, the Vane Global stock stayed high. If I was the hero, their golden boy was a fraud, and their empire was built on sand. "Julian," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent lobby, "your order? You didn't even know the password to the ballast system. You were too busy running for the stairs, while a 7-year-old girl was trapped under a table on the 99th floor." The crowd murmured. A reporter from the Global Architect Digest stepped forward. "Dr. Vane, is it true there was a child left behind? And what about the claims that the steel cables were substandard?" Julian's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Chaos of the moment, purely. And as for the cables, those are baseless rumors spread by competitors. The Icarus stood, didn't it? My engineering held." "No," I interrupted, stepping forward until I was inches from his face. "Physics held. My physics. And I think it's time the Sky Architect stopped reading from a script and started looking at the data." I pulled the tablet from my bag. It was cracked, but the internal drive was military grade. I didn't show it to Julian. I tapped a command that synced the tablet to the massive 80-inch digital directory screens in the lobby, the ones usually used to show off Julian's awards. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," I said, turning to the cameras, "this is the Blackback's audio from the 100th floor observation deck recorded 30 minutes ago." I hit play. Julian's voice boomed through the lobby speakers. "I don't remember the password. The consultant sent it up. I didn't think I'd need it." Then came my voice. "Move. I'm initiating a ghost architect override. I left a back door in the code before you fired me, Julian. I knew you'd be too lazy to change the kernel." The lobby went deathly quiet. Julian's face turned a shade of white that matched the marble floors. But I wasn't done. I swiped the screen, and a spreadsheet appeared. "And here," I continued, turning to the cameras, "is the procurement log, signed by Julian Vane. It shows the cancellation of the Grade A titanium steel cables and the order of Grade B alloy from a shell company in the Caymans, a move that saved Vane Global $6 million and nearly cost this city 6,000 lives." "That's enough," Arthur roared, finally stepping forward. "Adriana, shut that off. This is family business." "No, Father," I said, turning the tablet toward him. "This is a crime scene, and I'm the lead investigator. You called me a clerk. You said my degree was cheap, but that cheap degree taught me that a foundation built on lies will always crumble. You chose the son who looked like a winner over the daughter who actually did the work." At that moment, the doors to the lobby swang open again. 2 men in dark suits, federal investigators from the Building Safety Commission, walked in. They didn't go to me. They walked straight to Julian. "Julian Vane?" the lead officer asked. "You're arrested for reckless endangerment, corporate fraud, and violation of the National Building Code. We've been reviewing the anonymous whistleblower report sent months ago. The data we just saw on the screen confirms it." Julian looked at our parents, pleading, "Dad, Mom, do something. Tell them I'm the architect. Tell them she hacked the logs." But Arthur Vane did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He looked at Julian, then at the ruins of his reputation, and then at me. He saw the fire in my eyes, the same fire he used to have before he started chasing yachts and social status. He realized that the only person left who could save the name Vane wasn't the one in handcuffs. Arthur didn't move to help Julian. He stayed silent. As the police led Julian away in front of every major news outlet in the country, my mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing, not for Julian, I realized, but for the loss of her perfect life. The reporter from the Digest turned back to me. "Ms. Vane, or should I say Architect Vane, if Julian didn't design the Icarus, who did, and what happens to the building now? It's still standing, but it's a skeleton." "I designed it," I said, standing tall. "I wrote the original code, I drew every line, and as for the building, it's going to be stripped.
Every grade B cable will be replaced. The spire will not be rebuilt. It will remain a crownless giant, as a reminder of what happens when ego outweighs engineering. And Vane Global? Another voice asked. With Julian in jail and your father's reputation in tatters, the company will be bankrupt by Monday. I looked at my father. He looked broken. He held out the keys to the headquarters, the same keys he'd once told me I'd never touch. "It's yours, Adriana," he whispered. "It was always yours. I was just too blind to see the blueprints." I took the keys. They felt heavy, cold, and right. Vane Global is dead, I told the cameras. Effective immediately, the company is being restructured as Rose Vane Architectonics. We will be a non-profit for the next 2 years, dedicated to repairing the structural damage caused by Project Icarus and reinforcing the city's low-income housing. I walked out of the lobby, past the shattered glass and the weeping socialites. The rain had stopped. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds, reflecting off the steel bones of my building. I wasn't the dumb one anymore. I wasn't the failure with the pencil. I was the woman who had brought down a king to save a city. And I was just getting started.
They say it's easier to destroy than to build. In the world of high finance, that's not just a proverb, it's a business model. A week after the arrest of Julian Vane, the Icarus Tower sat like a hollowed-out ghost in the center of the city. To the public, it was a symbol of heroism and scandal. To the insurance companies and the hedge fund vultures, it was a distressed asset, worth more as a pile of rubble than a standing structure. My father's old partners wanted to trigger the total loss clause, blow up the building and walk away with a billion-dollar insurance payout. But I didn't spend 3 years dreaming of this tower just to watch it crumble because of some accountants. I built it once on paper. Now I had to build it again in reality. 7 a.m. The boardroom of what used to be Vane Global Construction was quiet, but the air was thick with the smell of expensive tobacco and predatory intent. I sat at the head of the table, the seat my father had occupied for 30 years. Across from me sat Marcus Thorne, the lead representative for the insurance syndicate, and a panel of investors who looked like they were attending a funeral they couldn't wait to finish. "Miss Vane," Marcus began, sliding a thick stack of legal documents toward me, or should I say CEO Vane, "we admire your bravery on the night of the storm, truly, but let's be realistic. The Icarus is a PR nightmare, the structural integrity is a question mark, and the cost of retrofitting the Grade B steel is astronomical. We've decided to move forward with a controlled demolition." I didn't even look at the documents. I leaned back, my eyes scanning the faces of the men who had once toasted Julian's genius. A controlled demolition? You mean a controlled payday. You want to wipe the slate clean, take the $1.2 billion insurance check, and leave a hole in the middle of the city for the next decade while you litigate the cleanup. It's the most fiscally responsible path. Who would ever want to rent an office in a building that almost fell down? "They'll rent from the woman who made sure it didn't fall down," I countered. I opened my laptop and projected a new set of renders onto the wall. This isn't a demolition plan. This is the exoskeleton initiative. We don't need to tear the building down to replace the cables. We're going to wrap the core in a reinforced carbon fiber lattice. It will make the Icarus the strongest, most flexible skyscraper on the planet, and we'll do it for half the cost of a demolition. Marcus laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "And where will the money come from, Adriana? Your father's accounts are frozen due to the fraud investigation. Vane Global, or whatever you're calling it now, is broke. You have 48 hours to prove you have the liquidity to start repairs, or we trigger the unsafe structure clause and bring in the wrecking ball." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. He was right. I had the brains, I had the blueprints, but I was fighting a war with an empty treasury. I watched them walk out of the room, their expensive shoes clicking on the floor like a countdown clock. I was alone for 5 minutes before my assistant, Sarah, the only person who hadn't quit the company, walked in. "Adriana, you have a visitor.
In the holding cells at the precinct. It's Julian." The visiting room at the precinct was a far cry from the velvet-lined lounge of the Icarus. Julian looked terrible. His golden boy tan had faded into a sickly prison gray, and his Harvard ring had been replaced by a plastic ID band. "Adriana," he whispered into the phone, his eyes darting around, "you have to help me. The prosecutors are talking about 20 years. 20 years for a mistake. I'm a Vane. I can't be in here." "You aren't a Vane, Julian. You're a felon, and it wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. You chose to risk lives for a bigger yacht. Why am I here?" Julian leaned closer to the glass. "I have something Dad kept in a private ledger, offshore accounts he didn't even tell Mom about. There's nearly $80 million hidden in a trust in Singapore. I have the access codes. I'll give them to you, Adriana. You can save the company. You can fix the building. All you have to do is tell them one small lie to the court, the lie my parents have been telling for me my entire life." "$80 million, I repeated. "Think about it, sis," Julian pleaded, a glint of the old manipulator returning to his eyes. "Without that money, Marcus Thorne wins. The Icarus falls. Everything you worked for becomes dust. Just one statement, that's all it takes." I stood up, hanging the phone back on the hook. I didn't say a word. I walked out of the precinct, the neon lights of the city blurring in my vision. $80 million of dirty money to build a clean building. I went back to the office and found my father sitting in my chair. He looked a decade older. "He offered it to you, didn't he? The Singapore Trust." "You knew about it, Dad?" Arthur Vane nodded slowly. "I built that for a rainy day. I never thought the rain would be a hurricane. Take it, Adriana. Use it to pay off Thorne. Save the legacy. I'll go to the prosecutors and take the heat for the offshore accounts. Just save the Icarus." I looked at the blueprints of the Icarus on my wall. Then I looked at my father, a man who was still trying to buy his way out of a moral bankruptcy. "No," I said. "No?" Arthur stood up, confused. "Adriana, this is the only way. If I use stolen money to fix a building built on lies, then I'm no better than Julian. I'm not going to lie for him, and I'm not going to use your rainy day blood money. I'm going to do this the way an architect does it, from the ground up." I spent the next 24 hours on a plane to Zurich. I didn't go to a bank. I went to the headquarters of Helvetia Engineering, the most prestigious and most conservative firm in Europe. They were the ones who had rejected Julian's original bid because they didn't trust his flashy math. I stood before their board of directors. I didn't show them renders. I showed them the hand-drawn sketches I'd made in the basement. I showed them the wind load failures I'd predicted months in advance. "I don't want a loan. I want a partnership. You provide the technical credit and the capital to repair the Icarus. In exchange, you get 40% of the building and the rights to the carbon fiber lattice I've patented. We turn the Tower of Scandal into the global standard for safety." The head of Helvetia, a man who had been building bridges before I was born, looked at my sketches. He traced the lines with a weathered finger. "You calculated the harmonic resonance using a nonlinear differential equation," he noted, his voice impressed. "Julian Vane used a standard linear model. He was off by 15%. "I know," I said. "I'm the one who corrected it." He looked up and smiled. "They called you the dumb one, didn't they? It is always the quiet ones who understand the weight of the world. Helvetia is in. Let's go save your skyscraper." I arrived back in the city exactly 47 hours and 50 minutes after my meeting with Marcus Thorne. I walked into the boardroom where the investors were already preparing the demolition press release. I tossed a signed contract from Helvetia Engineering on the table. "Repairs start at noon," I said, looking Marcus Thorne in the eye. "The Icarus isn't coming down, but your syndicate is out. Helvetia just bought your debt. Now get out of my building. I have a lattice to install." As they scrambled out, defeated by a cheap degree and a pencil, I looked at the Icarus through the window. It was still a skeleton, but for the first time, the foundation was solid.
In the architecture of a career, reputation is the load-bearing wall. You can replace the glass, you can reinforce the steel, but once the foundation of trust is cracked, the whole structure is at risk of a total collapse. I thought the battle was over when I secured the funding from Helvetia. I thought the truth was my shield, but I forgot that my brother, Julian, was never just a bad architect. He was a master of narrative. In his prison cell, stripped of his future, he decided that if he couldn't be the sky architect, then I wouldn't be the savior. He decided to burn the family name down to the ground, with me trapped inside. It started with a single headline on a tabloid news site. The Silent Architect. Did Adriana Vane let the tower fail for fame? By noon, it was a viral wildfire. Julian's lawyer had leaked a series of heavily edited emails and voice recordings. In them, it sounded like I had discovered the faulty cables months ago and intentionally waited until the grand opening to intervene, all to ensure maximum dramatic effect and a hostile takeover of the company. I was at the construction site, wearing my hard hat and reviewing the first shipment of carbon fiber panels, when a swarm of news drones descended like mechanical locusts. "Ms. Vane, is it true you gambled with 6,000 lives just to humiliate your brother?" one reporter shouted from a loudspeaker. "The leaked memos suggest you had the torsion report in June. Why did you wait until the building was screaming?" I stood my ground, my heart racing. I knew those memos were forgeries, bits and pieces of my early warnings to my father, twisted to look like I was plotting. But in the court of public opinion, a lie that sounds like a movie plot travels faster than a boring truth about structural engineering. I looked at the crowd of workers. Some of them were looking at me with doubt. They were the ones risking their lives on the 90th floor based on my math. If they stopped trusting me, the exoskeleton initiative was dead. I retreated to my temporary office in the construction trailer. Sarah was there, her eyes glued to a tablet. "Adriana, it's bad. Helvetia Engineering just called. They're pausing the next wire transfer until an ethics committee reviews these leaks. They can't be associated with a calculated catastrophe." Calculated catastrophe? I slammed my hand on the desk. I warned them. I warned Dad in June, July, and August. I was the one who was fired for it. "The records of your warnings were on the Vane Global Central Server, Adriana," Sarah said quietly. "The server that was wiped during Julian's arrest. All we have is his word against yours, and his lawyer is much louder." I realized then that I had been playing a game of science while Julian was playing a game of theater. I needed proof. I needed the original, unedited timestamps of my warnings, and there was only one place they could be, a backup drive that my father kept in a safe at the family estate. I drove to the Vane mansion that evening. The iron gates were covered in protest signs and graffiti. The house, once a symbol of our golden family, felt cold and hollow. I found my mother in the sunroom, staring at a blank television screen. "He's destroying everything, Adriana," she whispered without looking at me. "Julian says you're the reason he's in that cell. He says you could have saved us all if you weren't so competitive." "Mom, I need the backup drive from Dad's safe. I need to prove that I tried to stop this in June. If I don't, the company goes under and the Icarus will be demolished. We'll lose everything." Madeline Vane finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the woman she used to be before the money took over. "Your father," she said, "he gave the drive to Julian's lawyer this morning. He thought it would help Julian's defense. He thought if he could make it look like a shared family error instead of Julian's solo fraud, the sentence would be lighter." My blood ran cold. He gave away the only thing that proves my innocence to save the man who tried to kill us? "He's his son, Adriana," she said, her voice cracking. "He couldn't let him rot."
I didn't stay to argue. I walked out, the weight of the betrayal crushing the air from my lungs. My own father had traded my reputation for Julian's comfort. I sat in my car, staring at the Icarus on the horizon. I was being framed as a villain by the people I had saved. But then I remembered the ghost architect override. When I built the ballast software, I didn't just leave a back door for the controls. I built a black box into the kernel, a hidden partition that recorded every system login, every warning light, and every manual override. It wasn't on the central server. It was on the local hardware at the top of the tower. 11 p.m., I returned to the tower. It was dark, the cranes standing like skeletal sentinels against the moon. I bypassed the security guards, men who had once called me boss and now looked away in shame, and took the service lift to the 92nd floor. I entered the main mechanical room. The air was thin and smelled of grease and ozone. I found the primary server rack. Julian's team had tried to wipe it, but they were amateurs. They didn't know that I had mirrored the data on the thermal sensor's firmware. My fingers flew across my tablet, retrieving logs, June 14th, June 28th, August 10th. There they were. Every time I had logged in from my junior clerk terminal to flag a stress fracture, the system had logged it. Every time Julian had manually dismissed the alert with the code override lead architect, the system had captured his digital signature. Suddenly, the lights in the mechanical room flickered and died. A shadow moved near the doorway. "You always were too smart for your own good, Adriana," a voice said. It wasn't Julian, it was Marcus Dorn, the insurance rep. He wasn't alone. Two heavy-set men in security uniforms stood behind him. "Marcus?" I stepped back, clutching my tablet to my chest. "What are you doing here?" "The Icarus is worth $1 billion in insurance money if it fails, and zero if you fix it. Marcus's lawyer made me an offer. I help him ruin your reputation, and in exchange, he ensures the exoskeleton fails so the demolition proceeds. It's a win-win. Julian gets out on a technicality, and I get my payout." "You're going to sabotage the building?" I whispered. "Not the building. You," Marcus smiled. "A tragic accident during a late-night unauthorized site visit. The disgraced architect falls from her own creation. It's the perfect ending to the story Julian started writing." I looked at the data on my screen, 100% downloaded. I didn't have a weapon, and I was 92 floors with 3 men who wanted me dead. I looked at the primary ballast valve, the one I had used to save the building during the storm. "You're right about one thing, Marcus," I said, my finger hovering over a command on my tablet. "And that means I know exactly how to make this floor move." I hit execute. The 100-ton ballast tank directly above us suddenly shifted, releasing a surge of water that caused the entire floor to tilt at a violent 15-degree angle. Marcus and his men were caught off balance, sliding across the slick metal floor towards the safety netting as I grabbed a support pillar. I didn't wait. I bolted for the emergency stairs, the data safely in my hand.
There is a terrifying clarity that comes when you realize the people who shared your DNA are the ones most willing to sell your soul. My father had traded my life for Julian's freedom, and Marcus Thorne was ready to turn my masterpiece into my tomb for $1 billion check. I was no longer fighting to save a building. I was fighting to survive a dynasty of vipers. But vipers are cold-blooded. They rely on shadows. I realized that the only way to kill a shadow is to flood it with so much light that there's nowhere left to hide. If they wanted a spectacle, I would give them the greatest show on Earth. The morning after the confrontation on the 92nd floor, the city woke up to a cryptic notification sent to every major media outlet. The final blueprint, live from the peak of Icarus, 6 p.m.
I didn't send it from a Vane Global account. I sent it using the encrypted Helvetia Engineering channel. I wasn't just Adriana Vane anymore. I was the sole proprietor of a truth that was about to break the skyline. I spent the day in a secure room provided by the Swiss engineers. We didn't just review the logs I'd stolen. We mapped them onto a visual timeline. Every lie Julian told, every bribe Marcus Thorne offered, and every signature my father had forged to protect the family was now a glowing red dot on a digital map. I wasn't just building an exoskeleton for the tower. I was building a cage for the men who tried to break it. 5:45 p.m. The wind was howling again, a mournful 40-mile-per-hour gust that made the crownless giant sway with a gentle, rhythmic grace. The North Plaza was packed with news vans and thousands of spectators looking up. They couldn't see me yet, but they could see the massive projectors I had installed on the side of the building. The Icarus was about to become the world's largest television screen. I stood on the 100th floor observation deck, the same place where Julian had stood with his golden scissors. But the champagne was gone. The jazz quartet was gone. In their place were 2 chairs and a single table. I had sent 2 private invitations, one to my father, Arthur Vane, and one to Marcus Thorne. I told them both the same thing. I have the original drive. If you want it back before I release it to the feds, meet me at the top. Alone. The elevator hissed open. Marcus Thorne stepped first, followed closely by my father. Arthur looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 24 hours. Marcus, however, looked smug. He had a silenced pistol tucked into his jacket. I could see the silhouette, and a look that suggested he thought he had already won. "Please, Adriana," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. "Just give us the drive. We can settle this. I've spoken to the lawyers. We can set up a trust for you. You can move to Europe, start a new firm." "A trust, Dad," I laughed, the sound whipped away by the wind through the shattered window. "Is that what my life is worth? A payout to keep me quiet while Julian gets out of jail and Marcus here gets his insurance money? You're still trying to buy the blueprints, but you don't even know what the house looks like." Marcus stepped forward, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Enough of the melodrama, Adriana. You're alone. No police, no news crews, just the wind and a very long drop. Give me the drive or I'll ensure your suicide note is very convincing." I didn't flinch. I sat down in one of the chairs and gestured to the other. "Sit down, Marcus. You too, Dad. Let's look at the view. It's spectacular today." "I said, give me the drive," Marcus snarled, pulling the gun and aiming it directly at my chest. I leaned forward, my face illuminated by the glow of my tablet. "You should check the projectors, Marcus, and the news, because right now the entire world isn't just watching me, they're watching you." I tapped a command. Suddenly, the dark glass of the surrounding buildings reflected a blinding light. The side of the Icarus Tower erupted as a gargantuan display. It wasn't my face. It was a live feed of the 100th floor. I had hidden 6 high-definition cameras in the structural trusses. Marcus Thorne's face, aiming a gun at the savior of the city, was now projected across 50 stories of glass, visible for 10 miles. Marcus froze. He looked at the window, then at the camera lens hidden in a smoke detector. He realized in a heartbeat that he wasn't in a private meeting. He was on the most watched broadcast in history. You wouldn't," he stammered, his hand shaking. "I already did," I said. "Every word you said in the elevator, every threat you made on the 92nd floor, it's all been recorded and uploaded to a decentralized server. Even if you pull that trigger, the truth is already out. You're not getting $1 billion, Marcus. You're getting a life sentence." Arthur fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands. "What have I done? My God, Adriana, what have I done?" "You chose the wrong legacy, Dad." I looked down at him. "You thought the Vane name was built on money. It was built on the pride of building things that last. You stopped being a builder and started being a ghost."
I turned my gaze back to the camera, speaking to the millions watching below. My name is Adriana Rose Vane. My brother stole my work, my father betrayed my trust, and this man tried to kill me to collect an insurance check on a tragedy he helped create. But the Icarus is still standing, not because of a Vane and not because of a Harvard degree. It stands because the math doesn't lie, even when people do. At that moment, the roof access door burst open. It wasn't security, it was the FBI tactical team, led by the same investigator who had arrested Julian. They swarmed the deck, disarming Marcus Thorne before he could even think about firing. As they cuffed Marcus, he looked at me with a hatred so pure that it was almost beautiful. "You ruined it! You ruined everything for a building!" "No," I said, standing up and brushing the dust from my blazer. "I saved the building. I just ruined you." Arthur looked up at me, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. "Adriana, what happens now?" Now, I looked out over the city. The wind was calming. The harmonic resonance was a steady, peaceful hum. "Now, you go downstairs and tell the truth, to the police, to the press, and to the shareholders, and then you leave. I have a tower to finish, and I don't need any more golden boys in my way." I walked to the edge of the observation deck and looked down. The North Plaza was a sea of flashing blue and red lights. The people were cheering. They weren't cheering for a name, they were cheering for the girl with the pencil. I took out my old, worn-down lead pencil, the one I'd used to draw the first sketches of the Icarus in the basement, and I dropped it. I watched it fall, a tiny speck of wood and graphite, disappearing into the light. I didn't need it anymore. I had the keys.
They say that in fashion, everything is cyclical, that trends always return to where they started. But I don't believe in circles. I believe in seams. A seam is where two separate pieces of fabric become one, stronger than they ever were apart. 5 years have passed since the doors of the Sterling Mono Institute opened. The world no longer looks at a gray coat and sees ordinary. They see integrity. I have spent my life cutting away the excess, and in the end, I finally found the perfect fit. I stood on the rooftop garden of the Institute, looking out over a city that felt different. The sterling eclipse had turned into a permanent dawn. Below me, the streets were filled with people wearing mono, not as a status symbol, but as a tool for their lives. We had successfully decentralized luxury. We had proven that quality isn't a privilege, it's a right. My reflection in the glass was no longer that of a girl trying to hide. My hair was short, my suit was a sharp architectural navy, and my eyes held the quiet calm of someone who has nothing left to prove. "The graduation ceremony is about to begin, Mia," Silas said, stepping out onto the terrace. He looked proud, his role as CFO now eclipsed by his role as the patron of the Institute's scholarship fund. "The first class of Architects of the Body is ready, and Eleanor, well, she's already in the auditorium, arguing with a student about the tension of a hand-stitched buttonhole." I smiled. Some things never change. She still treats a buttonhole like a holy relic. "She's happy, Mia," Silas added softly. "For the first time in the 20 years I've known her, she's not performing. She's just Eleanor." I nodded. Our relationship had settled into a comfortable, honest resonance. We weren't the traditional mother and daughter. We were colleagues in a shared mission. We had unpicked the old wounds and re-sewn them with threads of mutual respect. The bitterness had been laundered away by the work. I walked down to the auditorium. It was packed with the next generation of makers. There were no celebrities in the front row, no influencers chasing a photo op. There were just weavers from the Highlands, tailors from Vietnam, and students from every corner of the globe. I watched from the wings as Eleanor took the stage.
She looked radiant in a simple cream-colored linen suit. She didn't have the hard, defensive shell of the legend anymore. "Today," Eleanor told the graduates, her voice steady and clear, "you leave this building not as designers, but as servants of the human form. You have been taught that a garment is only as good as its weakest stitch. Remember that. The world will try to tell you to cut corners, to hide the truth under a layer of lace. Don't let them. The anatomy of a dress is the anatomy of your character." As she finished, the room erupted, not in the polite, rhythmic clapping of a fashion show, but in a roar of genuine gratitude. I stepped out to join her, and for the first time I took her hand, not for the cameras, and not to prove a point, just because we were standing on the same ground. "You did well, Mother," I whispered. "No, Mia," she whispered back, her eyes shining. "We did well. I just provided the thread, you provided the vision." After the ceremony, I walked through the archives in the basement, the very place where the anatomy sketches had once been hidden. The space was now a public library of technique, open to anyone who wanted to learn the craft. I saw a small display case in the corner. Inside was my original gray turtleneck from the day I was fired. Beside it was the cardboard box I had used to carry my life away from sterling couture. A young student was looking at the display. "Is it true?" she asked, not recognizing me. "Did the founder really start with just this?" "She did," I said, but the box wasn't empty. It was full of everything she had learned while everyone else was busy looking in the mirror. The girl looked at me, her eyes widening as she realized who I was. "Miss Sterling, I'm working on a new type of biodegradable hemp fiber. I want to make it as soft as silk, but as strong as steel." "Then go back to the lab and break it," I told her, a small smile on my lips. "Break it until you find out why it's not working. That's where the beauty is, in the repair." As the evening sun began to set, I walked out of the building and toward the park. I didn't have a car waiting for me. I didn't have a security detail. I was just a woman in a well-made coat, walking through a city she helped heal. I thought about Adrian, who was now a consultant in a different industry, far away from the world of aesthetics. I thought about the coalition, which had crumbled into dozens of smaller, humbler companies. The war was over. The peace was productive. I sat on a bench and watched the people go by. I saw a nurse in a mono-tech scrub, a teacher in a mono blazer, a young artist in a mono jumpsuit. They were moving with ease. They were comfortable in their own skin. My name is Mia Sterling. For years I was told I had no taste, no vision, and no place in the world of beauty. But I realized that beauty isn't something you put on. It's something you build. The gray mouse didn't just survive. She designed a world where everyone has the right to be seen for who they are, not what they wear. I looked down at my hands, steady and strong. The fabric of my life was finally seamless. I stood up and continued my walk. There were no more ghosts to outrun, no more shadows to hide in. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And the fit? The fit was perfect.